So, talking of materials, what emerging materials excite you the most in the context of CMF and sustainable design today? I can't wait to hear from you on this.
So about 80% of the product's environmental impact is determined during the design phase. That's a lot, right? So we have so much impact at the beginning of the product. Today, CMF is really essential for meeting the company's sustainability goals, which is why I'm focused in this aspect of it. The CMF we choose directly impacts that product's footprint, and it's not really just about aesthetics anymore. It's really about pushing the boundaries of how we're going to get sustainable products. Core circular design is about, for me especially, is about reconnecting with nature's cycles. It's actually not a new concept. It's really a remembering of ancient practices that were rooted in regeneration and balance. As designers, we really have the ability to visualize and communicate the future of circularity, so we can make it really tangible for what, and get people excited about it for companies and consumers. It's, shifting that perception of new. This is a new era of design, and companies need to step outside of their traditional methods, and you need to really stay curious and ask those questions, those hard questions.
So, Monica, to start with, can you tell us what prompted your passion for sustainable design?
Yeah. So I studied industrial design back when the iPhone had just come out, which was a big era for product design and technology, and really like a global appreciation for the design of objects. I worked for large companies like Amazon and small startups in the Bay Area, and I started designing bags and accessories, which by necessity were using a lot of colors and added personality. So it was really a natural transition to move into a role of CMF, which means color material finish. And this role didn't exist when I was in college. CMF didn't exist. It was just industrial design or product design, which they use that term for a lot of things, but industrial design, the design of things. So as I moved into CMF, I really got more into the development process and the manufacturing side of it. I became really aware of how much waste is being generated even before the product reaches the customer. Like most of the stuff in the development actually just goes into the garbage. So this actually had a lot of weight on me, and understanding that most of what I was designing is going to end up in the landfill. And that was just like a lot for me. A really significant turning point came when I was just walking on the beach and I saw electronic waste, garbage on the beach. And I realized that, I was part of that problem. So yeah, that's kind of what prompted me to become a more sustainable designer. And I stepped away from the industry to live more sustainably and to learn about how to be a more sustainable designer. And I lived on a sailboat, which is actually when I met you. And I learned, it was Oceans Projects. And I learned about like living more sustainably on a sailboat. You really have to be aware of your resource usage, like power and water consumption. And then I actually considered leaving the industry completely, but then I realized that I actually have like a lot of extensive knowledge in this industry, and I'm able to speak the language that businesses can understand, which is like really why I'm working in this space today. So yeah.
Wonderful. Yes. For people who don't know Monica, I can tell you that she lives and breathes sustainability, and she's one of the biggest advocates I know. And yeah, I love your lifestyle as well, which is really close to nature, and I think you really make a point of that. And where did you say you're joining the podcast recording today? Where are you in the world?
Yeah, so currently I live part-time in the Dominican Republic, which is really a developing country. You kind of have to be forced to live in tune with nature and live sustainably here. It's just kind of part of life, and you need a lot less when you live here. You don't need a whole lot, and it's nice to see the world from a different perspective too.
Yeah, people I know who are a bit nomadic, like you are. I've often heard that they live with less. It's almost like you lighten up the load, basically, which must be really interesting because we live with so much.
Yeah, it's almost like, well, just living in a tropical climate, you really have to be aware of every item you have because of the climate, and stuff gets moldy. If it's in a dark corner, then it's just going to degrade essentially. Everything is growing and dying very quickly here. So you have to have that awareness of like everything I need, everything I use is what I have, you know, and what I buy.
So, Monica, talking of the objects we own or produce, the objects that surround us, the ones we buy, why would you say so many of the products we have created for decades are unsustainable and don't adhere to circular economy principles? And I also ask the question because sometimes, you know, like 20 years, 30 years, 50 years down the line, probably when we look back, we will think, oh, how could we be so unsustainable in the past? Why do you think we didn't start from that thinking from the get-go, or has there been a switch at some point?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately we live in a linear model by default, right? It's easy, it's cheap, it's fast, and it meets shareholder expectations, right? So it's really a growth-driven culture. It's capitalism, right? So this is just leading to overproduction and a lot of unnecessary waste, right? So I also think we're in a culture, you know, that it feeds into this emotional need where we really desire novelty and newness, and that feeling of fulfillment comes through consumption. And instead of buying, you know, we're buying instead of connecting and going outside and being in nature. So that's my feeling.
Yeah. We hear a lot about the linear system of producing, consuming. You're absolutely right. So that's a bit of a tricky question, my next one, and it's really more of an open one. But I was thinking, you know, what percentage of products we buy and are part of our everyday lifestyles would you say are sustainable or circular in design? Or what would be your estimate today? And perhaps to help, could you perhaps narrow it down to an industry or a product group in particular that everybody would be familiar with and would be a good example of today's status, just to open our eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on, you know, which region and, you know, the education of the consumer and the industry you're in. But I think an easy one would be like the fashion industry or, for example, textiles, which is what I'm more familiar with. For example, like I think it's less than 10% of products we buy today are really sustainable or circular. And of course, that number is changing. And then when you're speaking about textiles, synthetic fibers like polyester make up 2/3 of textile production. And even though it's polyester and it can be made out of recycled plastic bottles, which is cool, it's actually, as soon as it's made, that polyester, when it's washed, it turns into microplastics, which is the biggest contributor to ocean plastics, right? So as I mentioned, I live in the Dominican Republic, and here everything is secondhand shopping because the imports are expensive and you don't need a whole lot. So most of the clothes I buy are from the Haitian markets, right? And I buy like a really beautiful shirt. Actually bought this shirt for $1. And I remember when I lived in the United States and I would feel good to donate my clothes to Goodwill, and then I would go buy something new. And that's actually really like the donation system is very flooded, and it's really perpetuating that problem. Despite that awareness, I think we all understand fast fashion. We're still buying, you know, like production has increased 20% in the last 5 years, and we're keeping things and wearing them for half as long. And you know, there's really amazing progress happening with fibers are able to be recycled, which is amazing. It was available like 10 years ago, but this is slowly moving in. But fundamentally, we just need to stop buying new stuff. So yeah, go buy secondhand, don't buy anything new. And also the stuff that was made, you know, long time ago, vintage clothing is made really well. You know, it's made to last.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel there has been, because obviously, as you said, the fashion industry is so big, there is a lot of spending in this industry, and that's definitely one that has contributed to raising awareness of we need to implement better sustainability practices and in various areas of the supply chain. And yeah, it's interesting to hear you saying you buy second hand, because I think a lot of people do that today, including the newer generations, which is great. But it's a good figure to keep in mind. Less than 10% of the products you buy today are sustainable, which shows also the scope of the progress we still need to make. We will probably not get to 100%, and it depends how people define sustainability as well. But it's good to have some benchmarks in mind, I think.
Yeah. Sure.
So one expression that actually I think I discovered through you and that I really love is waste is a design flaw. I absolutely love that. So what would you say are the key flaws in today's unsustainable, uncircular systems? And why overall does it seem so hard or perhaps so slow to move forward with sustainability and circularity? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was putting this waste as a design flaw is really like on the designer, speaking to my audience of other my peers, I would say. So when you look at design or even just it's the beginning of a product, right? So about 80% of the product's environmental impact is determined during the design phase. That's a lot, right? So we have so much impact at the beginning of the product, and it's kind of really moving beyond aesthetics and functionality and thinking more about systems, right? Considering that life cycle, the material usage, and the end of life impact for the circular economy. And I think also it's important as designers to understand, like, before you're giving that design brief and before you create something new, it's important to understand that problem. What's the problem you're trying to solve, and evaluate if a new product is even the best solution, and whether maybe you can have a service or an app or even use an existing product to solve that problem. And that's the same thinking, right? It's not, of course, it's not just the designer. It's really about collaborating early with a lot of different functions and holding space for open conversations with like operations, or if you have a sustainability team, it's about creating better solutions, and actually everyone is accountable, right? So companies also that are really more agile and embrace change, especially now, it's like moving so fast, are able to maybe dedicate resources to managing transitions, and they would fundamentally be more successful today, right? That answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually funny because I was at an event last night with a fashion brand called Deploy. And the founder was saying that 70% of the waste of the product actually happens already before it hits the shelves. So I think it's really put the emphasis on design and actually the whole part before we actually even buy it, which really matters. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, when you work in any kind of industry, you really see the waste before it ever hits your hand. I mean, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes something will be designed and then they actually cancel it, and they just made 3 developments of that product and they canceled it, and all of the development went to waste, and the customer never sees it, which maybe is good, but still, it's so wasteful.
So do you think we are making any significant progress today in terms of circular and sustainable design? And what gives you hope personally?
Yeah, I mean, I stay optimistic for my sanity, and I like to, focus on solutions, but I think it's important to have a community and spend time in nature and stay grounded, which is also why I live in nature. I think it's comfortable. It's an uncomfortable place that we're in, but we're really pushing through. Progress is happening, and it's often behind the scenes, right? Working in this space is really tricky because it's really politically and emotionally charged, and you have to be really mindful that sometimes make, experiments under the radar because people are really critical, and they have the right to be. Greenwashing is super common, and it's a lot of pressure. So I do see a shift happening. Lots of regenerative materials and new technologies are emerging, and yeah, like I said, technologies I wish it was available 5 years ago, but it's coming, and it's really exciting to see it become a reality. I think the real challenge is scaling up and making it widely accessible. So sustainability is, yeah, it's not, it's a standard. It's not just an option, right? I really love the fact that it's something that we all have to work towards together globally, right? Because climate change doesn't have borders. And the idea of a global community is inherently really healing. Of course, there's all these global metrics that exist today, like the Paris Agreement and the EU Green Deal and the CSRD, and then there's LCA, which are encouraging transparency and helping me and other designers make better trade-offs. So that's helpful, but it's the idea of that global community that I think is really pushing it and making it like, when do we ever work together? You know, all over the world, we're working together. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, in the years, I've been in the impact space. One thing I've seen is that many innovations are driven perhaps by smaller startups, or it seems so. And we know, obviously, the biggest polluters or contributors, to waste, etc., are probably, the bigger firms, but it doesn't mean nothing happens behind closed doors, as you say, but we also need to be mindful in our consumption choices, like with people like Shein, for example, that we see massive growth. You mentioned it earlier that, we see production continuing to grow. We see products going to landfills to grow. So it's like we haven't halted these issues. They continue to grow still today, despite all the awareness and the good work that's being done. So, Monica, you have 20 years of experience as a strategic design leader, blending design excellence with environmental responsibility, and you are an expert in color, material, and finish. So, as you said, it's called CMF. You are also an expert in circular design and Scope 3 sustainability initiatives. So, I would like to talk about these three areas with you because they are all very interesting, and I'd like us to tap into your expertise. So to start with, how do you define circularity in the context of design, and why does circular design matter from your perspective as a designer?
Yes. Well, by definition, a circular system eliminates waste, right? So it's all the inputs are reused, and products are designed to be repaired, reused, and biodegrade. It's usually something that is embedded in the company's core values or ethos, right, for it to actually be successful. At its core, circular design is about, for me especially, is about reconnecting with nature's cycles. It's actually not a new concept. It's really a remembering of ancient practices that were rooted in regeneration and balance. Nature already operates in closed loops. There's no waste that exists in nature. So I think being a designer is really mimicking these natural systems. Yeah. Yeah, when we observe nature, also called biomimicry, we can come up with much better solutions, and we can give back like nature has always done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely love your definition of that and references. And yeah, we need to go back to nature. So, because we mentioned Scope 3 sustainability initiatives, I wanted to ask you, can you explain what Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are? Because I don't think that's something most people are very familiar with today, unless it's your job to look into it. But I'm sure I would ask people what are Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. They would look at me like this, like, what is this? So can you explain?
There's a lot of jargon, and I think that's really inhibiting us as a growth to navigate all these terminologies. So Scope 1, 2, and 3 are defined as part of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the GHG, which was established in 2001. The goal was to provide a standardized framework for measuring and managing carbon emissions. In 2020, it was more widely accepted for companies because there was a lot of stakeholder pressure to disclose their emissions as part of the ESG, or environmental social governance efforts. And really, investors and consumers really want more transparency and for companies to be held accountable, which is good. So Scope 1 is it's direct emissions. So it's something that you have control of. For example, like in your office. Maybe you're burning fuel for heat, or if you have a generator, or if you have a company car that burns gas, that's scope 1. Scope 2 is indirect emissions. So it's energy that you could purchase, like if you're on the grid and you buy your energy from the power plant, for example. It's anything that's off-site. And scope 3 is everything else, which is a huge category and more complicated. It's the entire supply chain and everything that happens outside of your direct control. And it's emissions from raw materials and transportation, waste disposal. And scope 3 is often voluntary, but I think this is changing to be more mandatory. Obviously, in manufacturing, it's become more of a demand, which is where I'm in. And so scope 3 is really a place where design plays a big role because it's, more juicy. We have more potential for impact as a designer and an engineer, which I work with a lot of engineers, because we decide how things are manufactured, right? But an easy way to think of it, if somebody asks you, is just to say like scope 1, 2, 3 is you burn it, you buy it, and everything else. It's like scope 1, you burn it, you buy it, and everything else. That's like how I remember.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for the definition. And just to mention this, I'm gonna have a specialist in scope 1 to 3 emissions on the podcast probably next month. So if you guys are interested, keep track of the podcast because we will discuss this more in detail with another guest as well.
Amazing.
So talking of scope 3 sustainability initiatives, because that's what you focus on, Monica, could you give us an example of scope 3 sustainability initiative you have tackled in your line of work and what benefits did it bring to really bring it to life for people?
Yeah. I'll talk to maybe one of the first experiments in scope 3 was when I was working at Amazon and I wanted to track the full life cycle of a tablet that I was designing or designing the next generation of. So I went to China and I started looking at all the sub-tier suppliers, where the raw materials and like the pellets that turn into the molds. And I even went to where the devices got returned at the return facility. It was really fascinating to see the entire design process or the entire manufacturing process, but I really wanted to understand how I could make better design decisions to reduce my emissions in the supply chain and improve that circularity. So a significant portion of scope 3 emissions for a device, and this is all devices, it comes from the energy required during its use. So every time you plug it in, right? That's and then also the end of life when it gets thrown away. We did have a recovery facility, which is something becoming more common for electronics. If you look it up, if you want to get rid of your broken electronics, you can return it most places. So in this process, I noticed return plastic parts, they'll get shredded and they'll get remolded, but it still requires a lot of virgin plastic to achieve that cosmetic requirements that we're used to seeing, that perfect part. And then certain colors like white were really hard to recycle. You're never going to get that white again. Glue and waterproofing made disassembly to take it apart really energy intensive, so it basically renders it unrecyclable. It goes right into the waste bin. And then also if you look at high gloss textures, like super shiny piano black kind of textures, they require an extra single-use film to maintain that look, even get through manufacturing. And then internal components that have a lot of fine detail, it's hard to achieve that fine detail with recycled plastics. So it's hard to get a lot of recycled content in that material. And then for aluminum parts, aluminum is actually a really amazing material because you can still achieve really high detail. So if you ever have aluminum, you should always use recycled aluminum. You don't ever need to use virgin aluminum. There's plenty that exists already.
Okay.
Well, after these findings, I sort of brought them back to my design team and I applied them to my work to design the next gen tablet. I worked to develop more durable colors and finishes that better conceal defects. And I looked at LCA also. LCA is life cycle assessment to explore alternative materials and compare and contrast the best options. And it really was the beginning of like this eye-opening moment of how I approach design today.
Yeah. Well, that's actually really fascinating to hear you talking because you're literally talking, of products we use every day, but we know nothing about them. And yeah, the layers that go into the design and the design decisions, it's fascinating.
It's very disconnected, right?
So thank you for that. So next question is the last area, CMF. So can you explain what CMF design is and why is it crucial in sustainable product development?
Yeah, so I mentioned a bit earlier, CMF is color, material, finish. It used to be more of an afterthought. When I studied industrial design, it wasn't a role. It became a role. As I was an industrial designer, it became a necessary thing just because designers wanted to focus more on the form and the function. And then CMF really is something that ties everything together. It's creating this cohesion across products. It unifies palettes and it also qualifies or pre-qualifies materials for designers so they're ready to go. It plays a really critical role in bringing a product to market because it really ensures that all the products are aligning with the brand language and the brand identity. Now, today, CMF is really essential for meeting the company's sustainability goals, which is why I'm focused in this aspect of it. The CMF we choose directly impacts that product's footprint, and it's not really just about aesthetics anymore. It's really about pushing the boundaries of how we're going to get sustainable products and having them be beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I find it a fascinating area of work, honestly. I don't know what your days look like, but if I could be a little mouse, I would follow you everywhere. That's just so fascinating. So what would you say are key principles that designers should perhaps follow to integrate sustainability into their CMF strategies? Can you walk us through it?
Yeah, I mean, in the past 5 years, since I've been really focused on sustainability, I have a few different guidelines and principles that I've kind of merged together. There's actually really like standardized 12 green engineering guidelines, which I think are pretty important for anybody making new products to understand. But then there's also permaculture principles, as I studied permaculture, which are kind of life principles. And then one of my favorite authors, Robin Wall Kimmerer, maybe you know, she also talks about the honorable harvest, and that's really the connection to nature that I think is really important for designing new products. So I'm just going to read them because I have 11 that I kind of go towards. So the first one is prevention is better than treatment. Ensure all materials, energy inputs, and outputs are as non-hazardous as possible from the start. Number 2 is maximize resource efficiency. Optimize mass, energy, space, and time to ensure minimal waste and maximum output. Number 3, minimize waste. Every input should have a purpose. No material or resource should go unused. Number 4, design for longevity and durability, not immortality. Number 5, promote and encourage reuse, repurpose, repair, and return, and make it easy to extend a product's life. Number 6, work with nature, observe how ecosystems operate with respect to natural cycles, ensuring harmony and balance. Number 7, ensure adaptability. Design products and systems that can adapt for future needs and respond effectively to change. Number 8, take only what is needed. Harvest resources responsibly, ensuring that enough is left behind for future generations to thrive. Number 9, give back and show gratitude. Maintain a reciprocal relationship with the environment and all beings. Acknowledge the value of resources and the land that it came from. Number 10, design for the common good. Create designs that benefit both people and the planet, ensuring equity, accessibility, and sustainability for all communities and ecosystems. And number 11, build resilient and regenerative systems. Focus on systems that not only minimize harm, but actively regenerate and restore natural resources and ecosystems. So it's sort of just a mergence of everything. And I look to this when I'm designing something, I'm like, just make sure I'm going through this. And even just reading it makes me feel really, nurtured and helped.
What a great list. I love it. Absolutely love it, Monica. Thank you for going through it. I was thinking, wow, if everybody would design like this, what a different world we would live in, isn't it?
Yeah. Print it out, put it on the wall.
Make a poster of it and leave it. Make it your mantra, day-to-day mantra. I picked on the cycle of nature because when you said this, very often in fashion, because we were talking of fashion earlier, people are saying it's so crazy that, brands have like 12 collections a year, or I don't know how many. It's like, of course we can't keep up with it. It's like totally unnatural, isn't it? And we totally live beyond the boundaries of nature, of what our planet can sustain.
Yeah, this is
Fascinating. Okay, so again, to bring this to life a bit further, can you share an example of a project where CMF choices made a significant positive impact on sustainability, perhaps enhancing waste, product longevity? I loved your design for longevity, not immortality. That was a really good one too.
Yeah. Well, currently I'll talk about a project I've been working on for a while. Here, access to clean water is an issue for everyone, expats and locals, even though there's tons of water. So I am working on a water filter actually, and it's for the developing market here in the Dominican Republic. And the materials I'm using are local clays from all over the island. They're inherently beautiful and they show their origins. They don't use a lot of energy to be cured. You just need either solar, electric, or a fire. And really, the materials themselves are inherently technical too, as well as beautiful. You don't need any finishing or extra treatment. The materials have parts of wood and silver, which actually are embedded in the ceramic, and those clean. So yeah, it's inherently a technical clay, and it's a beautiful project because it's really mimicking nature and natural systems. Is as the water moves through, it's similar to maybe a river coming down a mountain. It's collecting minerals and it's cleaning the water. And it's not a new design. It's like I said, it's something it's already all over the world. It's just something that I'm bringing here and trying to make it really beautiful and also let people understand where their water comes from and that you don't need to go buy a plastic filter. You can just use really beautiful clay that has that cleaning capability, and it's just a really beautiful project. I love working with clay.
Yeah, what a wonderful example. And yeah, it's not always about reinventing the wheel, but actually implementing solutions that perhaps already exist in design, but they actually don't exist where you are and where it's actually needed, isn't it?
Mm.
Wonderful. So, talking of materials, what emerging materials excite you the most in the context of CMF and sustainable design today? I can't wait to hear from you on this.
I mean, for me, I just put mushrooms exclamation point because I've been waiting for mushrooms in my
Happy
ceiling to
coming
happen
from.
today. And they're really like every day I see something. And I mean, they're like furniture and packaging. And it's really a beautiful regenerative material. And it's just ready. It's ready. Let's do it. And I see it all over the place. And I'm super excited to see that become more scalable and be able to use it in my designs, which I haven't gotten there yet. But also, yeah, like it's mimicking leather, it's mimicking fabric. It could be soft, it could be hard, and you can literally just grow what you need. Like it's so magical.
Yeah. I actually think I saw recently someone showing a chair. I think it was on LinkedIn, and they had grown it in a few days. And it was like a solid chair. And I was like, wow, that's amazing, isn't it?
It's just about time. Let's go. Don't be afraid of mushrooms. Like, let's move forward with it. It's coming.
Yeah, mushrooms are definitely having a moment, not only in design, but in the wellness space as well. So yeah, mushrooms are definitely having a big moment. So do you have also any colors, materials and finishes you like working with more in particular, and why?
Yeah. I mean, I think from as a child, when I learned how to sew, I'm always more drawn to textiles, like I mentioned before. I started as a soft goods designer, which is essentially an industrial designer that works with soft textiles. I like textiles because they're really adaptable, they're flexible. You can take a seam out to prototype really easily and fast, and they take on colors beautifully, and they can be organic and they can biodegrade. And really the history and the story of textiles, it goes back for generations, and it's really a language and a story of our origin as well, right? So for me, I will always gravitate
Culture
towards
as
working
well.
with fabric. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really lovely. I actually have a book about textiles in Africa. It's fascinating to go through the history of it and how it intertwines with different cultures of the different countries and the historical background. Oh, it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
So, if we look at sourcing, how do you keep track of all the material innovations being developed as a designer? Because it's really at the heart of what you do. And I was thinking, if I was a new designer, are there any particular sources that you like to look at or would recommend?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, it's definitely an ongoing challenge to stay updated and organized, especially with all the softwares that are, and platforms that are coming out. But I like to maintain my own reference material and then I comb through it daily, and that's, physical and digital. And then I like to thank the algorithms, like for example, that mushroom chair. I saw that, but that they definitely keep me updated on what I want to see. So yeah, in some sense, that's I think networking with like-minded professionals and like LinkedIn is a great tool for, and then in a lot of material groups, I stay engaged in the sustainability community, which is actually really open and collaborative. Everything's freely shared. I mean, I think there's not a lot of gatekeeping in this space because we all want the industry to move forward faster. And then I think for like macro trend type things, I would say I still use like WGSN and WD and Stylus, and these are kind of like global trends. And then for material libraries, Material Connection and Material Bank, those are some really cool resources that they can send you like specifically what you need and you can work directly with them. And then Materiome, which is more for like regenerative library. And then of course there's more like pre-qualified materials for companies like Cradle to Cradle, which have like pre-qualified library and LEED certification materials. And then there's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has their own materials listed as well, which is really nice if you want to like specifically, hey, I want something that's already qualified to meet my sustainability goals. And then you can use like LCA lifecycle assessment software sometimes to spark ideas as you're comparing different impacts for materials. It's a little extensive, this software, but sometimes you can find some cool stuff that way. So yeah, there's a lot going on out there.
Yeah, there is a lot. And that's a question I will ask you later, but I think it's so easy to find resources today. There are classes as well, keeping educated. And I love what you said about connecting, there is a lot of collaboration happening and sharing from various types of people. And it's actually lovely to see the community around information sharing growing and being already so big today. So what changes do you envision also in the CMF discipline over the next decade as sustainability becomes more central and needs to become more central?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely CMF is going to have to prioritize sustainability and circularity, in my opinion, obviously. I think, in the past, learning about design, or especially industrial design, it really was material follows the form. And I believe that materials will need to be introduced more early on and at the beginning to really drive the form. So the opposite. I think it's better this way to inform the manufacturer and then also its durability, right? This process of material first has the potential to avoid a lot of the downstream waste, which I've seen. I think this is what we talked about a little bit earlier, maybe a bit more controversial because I used to work in this space of like, this is the trend and this is the color palette for the next year, and every season we have new colors. I think that this is something that we will be moving away from seasonal trends. It's really contributing to the overconsumption. I think, like let's wake up to that. And maybe understanding that macro trend level, like stepping back and understanding how we can make something has more longevity, it's more adaptable, it's able to provide services and keeps consumers coming back to you. Yeah, I think also CMF designers will be key players in scaling these new and regenerative materials, getting them ready for mass production. I think that CMF has also always been a function of that scalability, cost, but now it will be more about improving yields and minimizing waste and refining those production methods. I think that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on using the tools that are available. For example, that life cycle assessment, which I use often, which is actually like if you talk to a lot of designers, LCA is actually it's really costly, this software, and it takes a lot of people and it's really time consuming. But there's new softwares that are coming out that are really fast. I mean, even AI has a role in it where you can just input what you need and then you get the carbon footprint right away of that material and it becomes like super fast. So you can iterate really quickly. So I think that this is where it's going for me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. I hear people talking a lot about how can we work better with longevity, because it's true we are all very sensitive to the news buzz, isn't it? And it's how can we keep that, because I think it's inherent to who we are as humans. But we were talking about second-hand fashion. How can we make the old new again, for example? There is so much to do around that. So I wanted also to talk with you about challenges, because obviously it's always nice to paint what we need to do around sustainability, but obviously brands are facing challenges to get there. So what challenges would you say brands face when trying to adopt sustainable CMF practices? Because I think it's really important to integrate that as part of the picture, because we come from certain systems and it's going beyond these systems and creating new ones today.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of challenges. I think it's important to just be inclusive in the conversation and when we're thinking forward, thinking frameworks and making sure that every function of every department has their diverse perspective and is included in the conversation. I think it's brands feel it's important to promote sustainability, but don't have that confidence, or they face that reputational risk, which really can prevent them from pushing forward or even trying. That's a big challenge, I think, a really big one, because people just, like I said, under the radar are making things happen. And of course, keeping up with changing regulatory constraints and guidelines is always changing, and kind of we have to stay updated and understand the language. I think that most people that work in this space today, they can't really be, especially today, they can't really be too loud because of the political backlash. And this is really like more apparent the last few weeks. So people are still working and it's still moving. And I think there's stuff happening, but I think that's the biggest challenge today, is just like a lot of the politics for me. I'm like, I don't want to stay out of it. I'm just keep on my path and go back to nature, go back to my guidelines and principles.
Yeah. So as a seasoned designer, what advice would you give to new designers interested in incorporating sustainability into their work? Would you have any advice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really need to understand the problem, like I mentioned before, that you're trying to solve, and reach out to peers and take it as an opportunity to collaborate on ways to solve the problem. Like, don't just go with a brief, like really be like, hey, let's step back. Because sometimes marketing will give you a brief or something like that. And you're like, hey, let's step back and understand why we're doing this. The same, like, question assumptions. This is a new era of design, and companies need to step outside of their traditional methods. And you need to really stay curious and ask those questions, those hard questions too, even if you're a new designer. Be authentic. Your unique perspective and your fresh energy are really necessary today to push us forward. Stay genuine to yourself. Understand that sustainability isn't a trend, it's a responsibility as a designer, and your designs will impact people and ecosystems and the planet. The choices that we make today, or you make today, will shape the future. Yeah, design with care, respect, and really purpose.
Yeah, and I really like the distinction you're making between designers and marketing. It's not the same job, and designers have a voice and a responsibility, and I find it so, so, so important as part of a big picture, in sustainability and circularity.
Yeah.
So let's talk regulations quickly. Does the pressure from regulations and consumer demand shape your approach to CMF in sustainable design, if at all? And do we need to see more of it? Are there enough regulation? Is there enough consumer demand for sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fine balance of like discouraging, but I think it's really a necessary pressure. And even though it gets overwhelming, I think it's crucial for driving change today. We need some boundaries. And I actually would say being a designer, designs actually are at their best when we're working within constraints and boundaries. I think that's for every artist and designer, working within boundaries really brings the next level of what you're making. I think it's, trying to stay informed and without feeling that overwhelm and understanding the language. And the more you learn, the simpler it becomes. Of course, leaning on tools and metrics, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of really amazing tools that make it a lot easier. And then be proactive and part of the solution. It makes the pressure more manageable, like get ahead of it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's really good advice. So you did mention AI earlier in the conversation, and you've been working on tech products like you told us, and you've actually done wonderful work for Amazon. You mentioned that, and I think I'll share your coordinates, your website, and it's right there, and people can really appreciate the design work you've done in the past on their tablets and products, because it's actually really beautiful, but also very sustainability integrated to it. So I wanted to ask you, because obviously AI is like a big topic in the world at the moment and for the years to come. Do you integrate AI into your CMF design process today, and in what ways?
Yeah. I think everyone's kind of dabbling in
It's such
AI.
an interesting topic because we all do to a certain extent, but I'd like to hear from you on this.
Absolutely. I think it's a fantastic tool. It's really a game changer for CMF design because you can visualize ideas very quickly, and something that maybe took months just takes a few hours. I think that when I was an industrial designer, I used to spend a lot of time doing 3D modeling, like making something in 3D space and focusing on that tiny little corner. And I really didn't like it. I did not like that part about my job. And now it's becoming much simpler, and I feel like, okay, it's about time. Like I was waiting for this to happen, so I didn't have
Yeah.
to do those little things. So I also think it's really inspiring to see how other designers are pushing the limits with AI features and showing like how they're doing it. So I'm definitely trying to stay up to date with that, which is moving every day. Of course, the potential is exciting, but it's important you kind of manage your time wisely with AI because you can get really rat holed for hours and hours. And then, of course, there's environmental implications of that. Um, I like to imagine, AI will solve its own energy problem, but right now it is extremely energy intensive. So you have to keep that in mind as you're playing around and learning in this space. But I really enjoy it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. I think we are all toying with it, but yeah, it's such a fascinating area. And I love also talking to you about it because, I think sometimes there is this fear, oh, AI is going to take over, but it's a tool that we can use. And you're a designer, so obviously you're right there at the beginning of the creation process. And that's really important. I
I'm not
can't wait
scared.
to see what it's gonna, help us do, really. I do use it as well in my line of work, and that's so useful. So how do you see the role of CMF evolving in response to the challenges like climate change? I don't know if we've really done that link with climate change so far. What would you say around that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, we kind of touched on a little bit, but as designers, we really have the ability to visualize and communicate the future of circularity. So we can make it really tangible for and get people excited about it for companies and consumers. It's, shifting that perception of new will be essential. It's understanding moving away from that virgin material mindset and using, recycled and reuse and bio-based alternatives. Again, durability will be more important than ever. And, for me, it's really designing those beautiful finishes that, yeah, really, maybe they will show defects, but they're still beautiful, like natural nature and just like us. I think that, it's going to be a crucial role for designers to close those material loops, ensuring that, products are designed for disassembly and recyclability from the start. And then it's, again, that, using your sphere of influence to collaborate across disciplines from engineering to supply chain and creating CMF strategies at scale. Same
Yeah,
a little bit
absolutely.
we said before.
So in the last questions to you, I also wanted to talk about consumption because that's obviously one of the big things we need to tackle. So as a sustainability advocate, what is your vision for the future of design in relation to CMF and responsible consumption? How can it help?
Yeah. So, I mean, CMF will make sustainable choices more intuitive and accessible, I think. I think regenerative materials and closed loop systems really need to become the norm for us to move into this world that we're in, meet our targets and goals. I think that transparency and collaboration will drive responsible consumption. And then I really like to believe that we all want to do better. I really like to believe that everybody wants to do better. So that I think is helpful just to go back. Like, I do want, and I've seen every function of operations and just being responsible for cost. I think that person wants to do better too. So it's really like we can all be the same in that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also we are still at a time when, people have to make conscious choices to choose sustainable. But if companies offer sustainable choice as a primary choice, it will make the choice for the end consumer irrelevant, right? Because it will be made for them and it will be so much easier. I guess what I want to say is that it shouldn't be all about the end consumer to make the choice. This is why the conversation with you is so important today, because it starts much before, as we said, waste is 70% before the product even hits the shelf. So yeah, we do need to consider that in the picture. So that concludes our podcast with you, Monica. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really loved discussing CMF design, and I hope that people will take a lot of takeaways from it, because we need to remember that it's part of all the objects that surround us and that we buy and produce. So it's a really important topic. Thank you to everyone for watching and listening today, and I will see you next week with a new guest. Thank you.